Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are actually doing a build request. This one came up rather recently, but I saw it and I immediately wanted to give it a go, because they asked me to do a archer build using a bow that focuses on ice damage, and I thought that's actually a really unique and interesting idea, especially since I haven't done a bow build in a long time. I've done archer builds before, but they've been hand crossbows or the like, and as such, I think my last bow build was actually the Holy Arrow, which was the first one I did. So really, this is kind of a rarity on the channel, so I thought, hey, let's spice things up a bit and give it a go. Now, the way I've gone about this is a bit interesting, at least in my opinion. I'm diving deep into a subclass that I haven't before, and I'm quite excited to show that off. And I thought, this build will be fun, it'll be thematic, but it won't be that powerful. It's, you'll see the combat footage. This build goes kinda crazy in the right circumstances. You'll see what I mean, but let's get into it. First off, I'm playing a High Elf. Now, this is entirely optional. I mainly just wanted to have the Ray of Frost cantrip for a little strategy I'll be getting into later, but it's not 100% necessary and is not a main cornerstone of the build. So it's optional, you don't have to do this, but if you wanted to kind of go for exactly what I'm going for here, you can pick this up as well. Although, again, it's not 100% necessary. And yeah, well, let's get into the class. We're obviously going to be starting off with a Cleric, if you couldn't tell. And this is going to get us a few things, like our cantrips, that just being the standard resistance, guidance, and thaumaturgy, you know the drill by now. And the subclass we're going to be using is the Nature Domain. Now you're probably thinking, why Nature Domain? Like, why would we go with this instead of something like War if we're going Cleric or something like that? Well, Nature Domain is going to get a very unique feature later on that is exclusive to Nature Cleric, but is going to work super well for this build. As for our cantrip for our Nature Domain, because you get an extra cantrip, we're going to be going with Shillelagh, just because this is going to give us a few other things that we can use later. And since we're going for a nature-themed Cleric, Miliki seemed like a good shake. Oh, and I will also point out, another reason to go High Elf here for the cantrip would also be to get the proficiency with longbows and shortbows, so we don't have to dip into a martial class to start to get those. We can get those right off the bat, which is pretty good, although we are going to be taking a multi-class later that is a martial class that will let us get this anyway, so you could choose to start with that if you wanted. Again, you can kind of play around with the levels however which way you want with this build. However, I really wanted to get to our higher level Cleric features first, so this build can kick off as early as we can, as we can allow. So, now my stats are going to look a bit weird here, in fact really weird, but let me explain. I want our Wisdom at 17 because we're going to be able to bump this up with an item that we're going to be getting later, and I wanted Dexterity at 15 because I want you to use Ethel's Boon to bump this up to a 16. This is going to make sense later. Constitution is at 14 because it's a happy middle ground, and Intelligence is at 12. Feel free to change this around. This is mainly here so our chance to use Ray of Frost isn't completely abysmal, but I just kind of wanted to try and, you know, incorporate Intelligence into this build as well, because I very rarely do. Unless I'm building a wizard, I very rarely include, like, an Intelligence as, like, a soft stat. So I kind of wanted to do so here, because you never know when it might come up. And as for our skill proficiencies, I have gone with the Outlander background for obvious reasons. I've kind of envisioned this character as, you know, a kind of typical, you know, druidic ranger type character, like, who has a bit of, like, holiness to them, because, you know, maybe they are a worshipper of Miliki or whatever, but they probably live closer in, like, the tundra, closer to, like, the tundra, or the very northern regions of Faerun, where there might be a bit more snow. I don't know if that's even a thing. They might even come from another continent altogether, but I definitely see them as, like, a snowy hunter type that has learned to use the cold to their advantage. That's kind of how I picture this, but go with whatever you like, obviously. So yeah, we've obviously gone with the Outlander background, and I've chosen Nature, Insight, and Medicine as our proficiencies. Next up, at level 2, we're going to be getting our usual Cleric stuff, Channel Divinity, and Turn Undead. We're also going to be getting our subclass action, Charm Animals and Plants. Now, obviously Charm Animals can come up a few times, but Plants? When does that ever come up? I mean, I guess it could be the, you know, the vines that come out of the ground in the Shadowlands, but I don't know, that's a weird one. Let me know where the kind of use cases for that would be. But regardless, we're moving on. As for our spells, we have a few that we have prepared here. Create or Destroy Water is going to be a big one. This will make, since we're doing ice damage with this build, this will make enemies vulnerable to it. So I feel like that's going to work out pretty nicely for us. And Sanctuary is also quite important. If an enemy gets into close range, you can use Sanctuary. Since we're not really using our bonus action that much with this build, you can use Sanctuary to safely disengage. So it's definitely worth having on this build, and I highly recommend it. I've gone for some generic healing spells, because again, with an archer like this, you might as well have some support utility built in, because, you know, if you're not going to be in the front line of combat, why not heal a bit if there's not much else to do in the turn? And then for our final spell, it can be whatever you like. Shield of Faith might be a good idea. Again, if you're not concentrating on anything else, this is a pretty good idea. As for Cleric level 3, we are going to be getting some extra spells from our subclass, that being Spike Growth and Bark Skin, usually exclusive to the Druid, but we get them here as well. As for our other prepared spells, I absolutely want to pick up Aid, as per usual. It is one of the better healing spells in the game, just to give your whole party a bit of extra HP, but feel free to take whatever you like here. At Cleric level 4, we are going to be getting our first feat, and since we are a bow build, it would make sense to go with Sharpshooter, allowing us to take a -5 penalty to our attack rolls to deal an additional 10 damage, and ignore high ground rules, meaning we don't take disadvantage if we're lower to the ground than our opponent. I maybe in these early stages, when you haven't quite got the equipment and the abilities to offset that penalty yet, to just use it for the high ground rule negation, but later on when we get some better equipment, this higher damage kind of aspect of the feat is definitely going to be important. And as for our cantrips, I mean, you can take whatever you like here, it really doesn't matter, but I quite like the theming of getting Produce Flame. Now, I know that we're making an ice build, but the idea that, you know, perhaps this person who lived in the Tundra Wastelands learned to kind of produce a small flame in their hand to help them guide them through blizzard, and maybe also melt frozen things. It just makes sense to me. So, yeah, we'll take it. And we do get an extra spell at this level, but honestly, take whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. To be honest, I don't really know. Command might also work, because you could command a creature to flee, moving away from you, allowing you to shoot them. That's actually a good idea. I'm surprised I didn't think of that earlier. Next up at Cleric level 5, we're going to be getting our usual class feature, you know, the Destroy Undead, allowing our turn undead to deal radiant damage. And again, we're also going to be getting those bonus spells, that being Plant Growth and Sleet Storm, which is actually very on theme. Again, creating a little ice storm to, like, create ice surfaces and disrupt spellcasters and douse fires. It's actually surprisingly on theme, and I forgot we got that, so I'm quite happy I saw it. As for our spells, I mean, come on, Spirit Guardians. Even if it's not necessarily on theme for the build, it would feel pretty silly not to take it. If an enemy does end up getting close to you, you might as well punish them for it. But I would also recommend things like, let's see, what can I kind of ditch? I might ditch Aid for now, just to show some other stuff off. Glyph of Warding would allow you to set an ice trap. That would also be pretty good and feel on theme for a kind of hunter-ranger type. So yeah, I quite like that. As for Cleric level 6, we are going to be getting an extra charge of our Channel Divinity and our subclass feature, Dampen Elements. When you or an ally gets hit with acid, cold, fire, lightning or thunder damage, you can use a reaction to halve the attack's damage. Pretty good, and it doesn't seem to have a cost associated with it. Unless I'm mistaken, I was pretty sure this took a Channel Divinity charge. But I might be wrong. I'll have to double check the combat footage, but I'm pretty sure that costs Channel Divinity, just a tooltip's not showing it. We also do get an extra level, an extra spell, and we'll just grab Mass Healing Word. Next up at Cleric level 7, we are going to be getting level 4 spells, including some extra ones, including Dominate Beast and Grasping Vine. I guess that kind of goes into that plants and animals listening to you type thing. Pretty nice. And again, with those level 4 spells, I absolutely do want to take Death Ward. I could see Freedom of Movement also being quite good, allowing you to kind of protect yourself from death and give you that kind of like agile archer movement with Freedom of Movement. Yeah, I quite like those options. And at level 8, we are finally here. The thing I went so far into Cleric for, Divine Strike, Elemental Fury. This will allow you to imbue your arrows with a 1d8 of cold damage, or fire and lightning, whenever you make your attacks with your bow. This is super, super awesome. It fits perfectly, allowing you to get that extra bit of cold damage. It kind of makes up for the fact that this build doesn't really get extra attack, because with another feature we're going to get later, you'll be able to really stack up that damage between Sharpshooter, the extra damage from this, some equipment we're using, and an extra feature we're going to get later. You're really going to feel like you're doing a ton of damage in a single attack, rather than just going pew 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 firing a bunch of times. It's definitely a different flavour of archery. It's less Legolas killing however many orcs and more this one arrow is enough to take you down. And as for our ability scores, I do want to grab an ability score improvement here and bump our dexterity up to a total of 18 with Ethel's Boon, just because I want to be able to make sure our attacks with our bow are as strong as possible. In fact, you might take that before you take Sharpshooter. It's up to you. You can play around with the kind of order you take things here. Now, we could keep going with Cleric and get some more things here, but I want to swap out of it and go with Ranger. Now, you could take these levels in Ranger way earlier. Again, if you're not playing a high elf, you could absolutely take these levels first to be able to get those kind of martial combat proficiencies and, like, you know, get the, the bow proficiency and all that. However, I don't mind taking Ranger here because it's mainly just adding on to this build's already existing power with a little bit of extra juice. So, taking Ranger, we are going to get Favoured Enemy, meaning that we can choose the Bounty Hunter, I believe it is. Yes, because this is going to give us a buff to our Ensnaring Strikes, making enemies have disadvantage on their saving throws against it. And for Natural Explorer, obviously we're going to take Wasteland Wanderer Cold to gain cold resistance, because that just makes sense. We're also going to get another ability score, and I guess another skill proficiency, my apologies, and stealth makes a lot of sense, especially when we don't really need animal handling. Next up at Ranger level 2, we are going to be able to grab a fighting style, which means we can grab archery, and this would probably be the biggest case for why you would maybe want to go with the Ranger levels a bit earlier, would be to get this, but I'm just kind of showing off the multi-classes in order of like the 4 levels we would take, like I usually do. But again, feel free to maybe take a 1 or 2 level dip into Ranger early on, if you don't mind delaying that Divine Strike. Also, we're going to be able to grab some spells, and obviously we're grabbing Ensnaring Strike and Hail of Thorns to start. Ensnaring Strike is going to allow us to restrict our opponents, preventing them from coming near us, and then Hail of Thorns is just a massive amount of bow damage that will work with our cold damage features. Unfortunately, you can't use this and Divine Strike cold at the same time, but you could use this with like any weapon buffs that you get, for example, which I'll talk about in a minute. At Ranger level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and I think the most appropriate option here would be the Hunter. Gloomstalker obviously would work, but Hunter is going to allow us to get an additional bit of damage with Hunter's Prey, Colossus Slayer. Once per turn, your weapon attacks deal an extra 1d8 damage if the target is below its hit point maximum, meaning that after we get off that initial hit, all of our attacks are going to do even more damage, really allowing us to stack up those single shots worth of damage and deal a ton. You're going to really see this stack up. Like I say, when you see the combat footage, when we hit those big numbers, and Colossus Slayer helps with that. And we do get an extra spell, and Hunter's Mark feels appropriate. We're not really going to be concentrating on much else, so it makes sense to get that extra bit of damage out of our attacks as well. I think it works quite nicely. And finally, at Ranger level 4, we're going to be getting our final feat of the build, and I'm going to say use that final feat for an ability score improvement to bump up your dexterity to a total of 20 with Ethel's Boon. This is going to allow us to, have our dexterity stat maxed out, meaning we're going to be getting a ton of damage out of our bow. And that is the build. Overall, you're going to get a lot out of this build. Tons of cold damage, tons of extra utility with the ability to heal and cast utility spells like Freedom of Movement and Death Ward. A lot of battlefield control with the ability to, use things like Spike Growth, Glyph of Warding, Grasping Vine, Plant Growth, and even be able to restrict your enemies with Ensnaring Strike, or do massive amount of damage with Hail of Thorns. And again, you also get unique strategies like Sanctuary to be able to disengage safely and be able to get in range to shoot, and use Create or Destroy Water to pack on the damage even more. But this build really shines with its equipment, so let's get into it. Now, for your headpiece, the end goal is the Mask of Soul Perception because it's going to give you that +2 bonus to your attack rolls, meaning that that's going to help offset the penalty from Sharpshooter by quite a bit, stacking this with the Archery fighting style to get a total of +4, meaning that you've almost entirely negated Sharpshooter. But again, this is an endgame goal, so let's provide some earlier game options, such as the Marksmanship Hat, which is going to give a +1 bonus to those ranged attacks. So basically a diet version of the Mask of Soul Perception, but something that I do think looks quite nice on this build, if I do say so myself. But let's get back to that and hide that immediately, because good god. But another early game option you could go for is the Cold Brim Hat. Once per turn, any condition inflicted on the target also implies Encrusted with Frost. And we are getting this already from another piece of equipment, but this would allow you to stack it up more. And for those of you that don't know, Encrusted with Frost causes the affected entity to have disadvantage on Dex saving throws, and when there are 7 or more turns remaining, the entity must succeed a con save or take 1d4 cold damage and become frozen. And then with Frozen, the entity is entirely incapacitated, but it does get released from the condition if they take bludgeoning, thunder, or force damage. But guess what? We don't do those damage types, so we can keep our enemies frozen and still continue to lay into them, which is pretty good. But like I say, we are going to be getting Encrusted with Frost with different ways, so this hat is not mandatory, but if you really want to focus on that status condition and don't care about Sharpshooter as much, then you can stack this on and have some fun. Next up, we have the Sharpened Snare Cuirass. This is just a nice kind of wintry looking medium armor that I thought looked quite nice, because with Nature Cleric you get to go all the way up to heavy. And this will add our full dexterity modifier to our armor class, and creatures have disadvantage on saving throws again when resisting your attacks and spells that inflict restrained. Again, this overlaps with Bounty Hunter a bit, but if you didn't want to take Bounty Hunter and wanted to take something else, then you could use this armor to overcome that, but you might find that you want to swap this armor out later anyway, for something maybe a bit more powerful. But I feel like this is a nice look fashion-wise, and I really like it. Now, next up is the Winter's Clutches. When the wearer deals cold damage, inflict 2 turns of Encrusted with Frost upon the target. Since we're pretty much doing cold damage, well, all the time, this is going to be going off all of the time. And we already went over Encrusted Frost, so I won't repeat it here, but this is definitely an important part of the build. Next up is the Boots of Stormy Clamour. I didn't really know what to fit into this slot, but since we are going with, you know, status conditions with Encrusted with Frost, you might as well get that extra bit of reverberation on top of it. Now, yes, technically the thunder damage from the reverberation could break an enemy out of being frozen, so feel free to swap this out if you like, but if in the meantime it is a pretty powerful extra condition to lap on. You're going to be knocking your enemies quite prone quite a lot between reverberation and ice surfaces that you'll be creating. So, I mean, this could work out, but you could swap this out for like the evasive shoes or the disintegrating nightwalkers or anything you like. I just kind of felt like showing this off here because it does have some synergy. Moving on to the accessories, we have Khalid's Gift. This can be obtained in Act 3, and it gives us a +1 to our Wisdom and gives us the ability to use Aid, but a minor version of it. However, you know, just a quick bump up to our Wisdom, rounding it out to an 18, is quite nice, just basically for free, because there wasn't anything else I really wanted to put in this slot. Next up is the Snowburst Ring. When the wearer deals cold damage, they also create a 4.5 meter circle of ice around the target. This is going to make a ton of slippery surfaces all around the battlefield that your foes will have to contend with. If they try to move towards you as well, after you shoot them from afar with cold damage, they have a risk of falling prone from that as well, so it helps keep enemies at bay. Now, next up is the Ring of Arcane Synergy. You can swap this for whatever you like, especially if you don't go with High Elf, in which case it's pretty much pointless. But this was just kind of the idea that if you wanted to use your Wisdom in addition to your Dex and Strength for the damage of our bow, you could cast Ray of Frost first and then shoot on the next turn. But really, you could swap this out for anything you like. For Strange Conduit Wing might work, getting a bit of extra psychic damage if you're concentrating on Hunter's Mark. But I figured I'd show off the combination of Ray of Frost, Ring of Arcane Synergy, and then shoot next turn with a ton of cold damage and extra damage from our spellcasting ability modifier, since it is going to be quite high, but it's entirely up to you. For our melee weapons, since we're mainly focusing on using a bow, we just get to throw whatever we like in this slot, that being the Club of Hill Giant Strength to set our strength to 19, and the Iron Vine Shield, so that if we decide to use Shillelagh with our bonus action that, again, we're not using very much anyway, we can cause our enemies who attack us with melee attacks to take a little bit of piercing damage, but it's mainly just here to give us that free bump to our armor class. And then, of course, the main thing of this build is the Titan String Bow. This weapon deals additional damage equal to your strength modifier. Because our dex is going to be maxed out with Ethel's Boon, and our strength is almost maxed out thanks to the club, this is going to be doing tons of damage, especially if you buff it with the Drake Throat Glaive. Because doing that would allow you to use Draconic Elemental Weapon Ice, and I haven't taken a long rest, so I can't show that off here, but that would turn this bow into a +2 bow, with an additional 1d4 cold damage on top of it, meaning that this weapon is going to do some serious damage. I mean, looking here, you can already see that our ranged attacks do quite a lot. In fact, I can also show off the additional cold as well. Yeah, and you'll just see, like, it does a ton of extra damage. But again, with Sharpshooter and, you know, the buff from the Drake Throat Glaive, you're going to be doing a lot of damage, and I mean a lot. This build is really, really good for dealing out those single shock, those single shot high damage strikes. There we go. And also filling the battlefield with ice and other status conditions in order to manipulate your enemies and keep them at bay while you shoot them. Now, I do think this build is a support build, in a sense. Like, obviously you're going to be doing a lot of damage, but your main strength is going to be when you're supporting your allies that are already in close range by shooting things that either they're already attacking or attacking other enemies that are going for them. This build definitely works best as part of a team rather than as, like, kind of on its own, and it was definitely reflected in the combat footage, because while it was easy to get off high damage numbers, the fact that we had to constantly, like, use kind of cheap tactics with Sanctuary to disengage to be able to shoot, it did get a little bit annoying, so definitely play this with a group. In fact, this is actually quite a good build for multiplayer, I think, but that's neither here nor there. But again, with all this equipment together, you're going to get a ton of really good cold damage in a quite unique way, that being a bow build, which again, I don't do often enough. So yeah, that is the build. Overall, like I say, this is going to be a really good build to maybe have on a party member or to use in multiplayer, where you can just have one member of the party sniping people from the back and dealing tons of damage and getting a bunch of ice abilities off, allowing you to create cold surfaces, making life hell for your opponents, or just going for that big burst damage with things like Hail of Thorns. Overall, I think I've actually done quite a good job with this build. I feel like it is really unique and has an interesting theming, but I think there is room for improvement here, especially once you get into that Act 3 equipment. Like, you get things like the Gaunter Mail if you feel like the Titan String Bow isn't really your shtick, and maybe get some things like the Armour of Agility or something if you want better armor. It's entirely up to you, but I really am quite happy with how this build turned out. I think the looks, the theming, and the overall mechanics of the build turned out really, really nicely. So to the person who requested this, thank you very much. It was a good time. As for end of video stuff, remember when I said the Storm Song build did well? Well, it's done even better since then. It's now, like, you know how, I don't know if people know this, but when you upload YouTube videos, your videos get ranked on a scale of 1 to 10 based on how well they did compared to your previous 10 videos. And the Storm Song shot straight up to #1. It is one of my best performing videos pretty much since the Twin Stars, which is really, really cool. So thank you all so much for the support on that one. That is awesome. I'm recording this before my video that is scheduled to come out tonight, which is Wednesday, comes out, so I'm still looking to see what happens with that one, but I think that one's quite a fun one, and I hope people enjoyed that one as well. Let me know. I guess let me know in the comments of that video, because by the time you see this, which will be the Friday, that one would have been up for a couple of days. Is there anything else? Oh yes, again, a reminder that this weekend on Sunday at 2 PM we are going to be doing our first live stream of Honor Mode with mods, and again, I really, really hope to see you all there. I don't think there's much else for me to actually say at this point, so I'll leave it here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.
Take this, or Guardian will little closer.